So, Season 3 of the Eighth Doctor Adventures had been the final departure from the Charlie era and a lot more populist, and while it did get Bigfinish some attention and lots of people appreciate it, the fact that Season 4 turned out the way it did kinda makes me think that some of the guys on the writing staff had similar feelings about it that I did. While Season 4 still has some of the more light-hearted elements to it that we'd seen previously, the grandiosity of the Charlie era was by and large back. And it sets up an interesting path for Lucy leading up to the devastating finale, which turned out to be one of Nick Briggs' finest works. But I'm getting ahead of myself and this runs a bit longer, so I won't dawdle. Death in Blackpool opens the series, and it's a Christmas special, and it kinda further serves to underline a point about the New Who Christmas specials that I persistently make every bloody year, and will continue to make regardless of whether it got boring a long time ago, as a means of mirroring just how bored I am with the "but it's got to be happy and chirpy because it's Christmas" argument that's trotted out every bloody time that they inevitably suck. While the EDAs had adopted a similar style to New Who, Death in Blackpool had the balls to use the fact that it's Christmas to be incredibly bleak and downright twisted. And it removed itself about as far from the general feel of the talking animal-filled Season 3 as it possibly could. It's a great opening statement for the series. This one's going to be all about misery and despair, so depressing fuckers like you, Stuart, will be right at home. Lucy is now dying in hospital on Christmas Eve and is trapped as a ghost for the runtime, overhearing people reacting to her passing, and the Doctor and her Auntie Pat talking about some of the things that she was never meant to hear. While an alien spirit that she meets on the other side tempts her to stay just outside reality forever. Death in Blackpool is this really nasty and grim piece about people dealing with death, and I personally think it's everything that Last Christmas should have been. Cause really, a loved one not joining you for Christmas should be treated as something heartbreaking. It's not really a theme that allows for, and then the happy little elves joined them, and they all sang a song about roasting on an open fire. This one also ties together a few of the loose ends regarding Lucy's Auntie Pat that we had at the end of The Zygon Who Fell to Earth, which you probably do have the context for if you're listening to this one to begin with. While I always felt that Russell's Doctor Who had a tendency to overstate its drama to the point where I could almost see the writer behind the script trying way too hard to tug at your heartstrings, Death in Blackpool feels every bit the gut punch that it should be, and also, spoiler warning, the way that Lucy and the Doctor part ways at the end of this one is just one of the most beautiful scenes in a Bigfinish play. Just a gorgeous, depressing and bleak scene that makes you want to go cry in a corner for a very long time. And I'm saying that's a good thing. Yeah, I definitely am a bit of a sadist, aren't I? Yes, Bigfinish, that's it. Smash my soul's head in. Die, soul, die! Sorry, I'll stop. Next up, we had a solo 8th Doctor in a December bonus release called An Earthly Child. Oh, I get it. Along with Spare Parts, it's another instance of Mark Platt doing a why the shit has no one done this before idea that seems so obvious, really. A return to where we last left Susan, on an Earth that's gone through a period of reconstruction after the Dalek invasion, where a culture of anti-alien bigotry has surfaced. Susan is now a political figure renowned for her work in aiding reconstruction, who's instigating humanity's contact with the supposedly friendly alien race called the Gold Reseed in order to foster a future of peaceful intergalactic relations for the human race. While her son Alex is fucking up her political career by getting involved in anti-alien demonstrations. While this one doesn't turn out to be as great as it sounds, we really should have had something like this at the 50th. Carol Ann Ford just slips back into the role of Susan nearly 5 decades later like she'd never been away, and it does do a very good job of using Susan's idealist head-in-the-clouds nature being at odds with the world around her and even her own son. A common opinion shared by some of the more critical Whovians among us is that fans' dream episodes are never likely to turn out to be nearly as good as we'd expect them to be, as much as you'd think that they should write themselves, because they've just got so much to live up to. The birth of the Cybermen we saw in Spare Parts appears to be the exception, but with so much expectation about what a return to Susan's life after the Doctor would be like pinned on it, yeah, this one was never going to turn out how we expected, no matter how talented Mark Platt is, and no matter how good Carol Ann Ford is. And she is amazing on Bigfinish, don't get me wrong. As is, this one's pretty good, but it probably needed a second part in there as its ideas feel really underexplored, and it does suffer quite badly from needs more time syndrome. It's good for what it is though, and it is an appropriate follow-up to the serious downer that was Death in Blackpool, even if it should have been a series-defining entry, and isn't. The Four Doctors is chronologically next, and it's a fucking expensive bastard. It's another of Bigfinish's December bonus releases, and it's one of few that's currently unavailable for separate purchase. You have to order a Bigfinish subscription package including the released Demons of the Red Lodge in order to get hold of it, although you can actually select it as a free gift with any other subscription package. You may not know what to expect from this one because, as you can probably guess, it was written for one reason and one reason only. Making up the numbers! The 1 Doctor, the 2 Doctors, the 3 Doctors, now the 4 Doctors, 5. They kind of missed a trick with the light at the end. If they'd removed a Doctor and called it the 7 Doctors, they could have justified another bonus release with 6 of them. Because the numbers must be filled, damn it. If I ever manage to convince Nick Briggs to let me write a story, I'm going to call mine the Pie Doctors. 3 and a bit incarnations of the Doctor. One of them shows up as just an arm and a leg. Actually, that's too good an idea to waste. Like, if Nick Briggs is watching this, how about the Pie Doctors as a comic relief special or something? Come on, drop me an email, go on. But yeah, if the main reason that you like multi-Doctor stories is you find the way that the Doctors play off each other fun, I'm afraid I'm going to have to burst your bubble by offering an alternate title for this one. A story that happens to feature 4 Doctors. Brackets there together in the last track, and that's basically it. The 5th Doctor shows up at this space vault with a stupid name because of a time leakage or something, which is attacked by Daleks, and then the 8th Doctor shows up in another part of the complex, and he and his former self stop the Daleks by setting up a time loop spanning his past lives, including 7 meeting Michael Faraday and 6 visiting a Dalek battlefield. It does do a decent job of folding events of different Doctors' lives into its own plot. It's a coherent timey-wimey piece, if nothing else, but I'd be lying if I didn't say the Doctors each partaking in the story on their own was a tad disappointing. I do like how it tries to intertwine the events into a complete picture, and Colin's particularly good in it, but I was just a bit let down by the lack of multi-Doctor interaction, and I wouldn't really call this one essential. Its name makes it sound much more enticing than it actually is. Next up, we have Situation Vacant, which sees the Doctor, now companionless, hosting a training day for potential new companions who've responded to a job vacancy advert to be a time traveller in a conference centre in London set up in the style of The Apprentice. And he oversees how well applicants cope with devised time traveller related tasks which spiral out of control into a real-life alien invasion. Yeah, I know, fucking gimmicky, right? It really does surprise me that Bigfinish were the ones to essentially do Doctor Who Does The Apprentice, as you'd expect this type of thing from New Who all the time, particularly Russell's era where we had Doctor Who Weakest Link and Doctor Who EastEnders crossover skits. Then there was The Power of Three where Alan Sugar actually had a cameo. And while some of the setup for this one's a little bit contrived, it's just too funny to cause me any real bother. Then it's not really reliant on reference humour as much as you'd think it is. When Russell did sci-fi gags based on real-world pop culture, it was usually direct, and the humour was derived from, hey, this is like a thing that I know in the real world, but now it's on Doctor Who. Usually because he did have direct access to said aspects of the real world that he was joking about. Whereas Situation Vacant has had to take something from the real world and build its own scenario on top of it, which I feel is the superior approach for this type of humour. I also think it was a really good idea to have some breathing room between Death in Blackpool and this one, given just how bleak that one was and just how light-hearted this one is, as going straight from that to something so fucking ludicrous and featuring a standout guest performance from James Barkman of Mitchell and Webb fame might have been a bit narratively jarring for anyone still getting over Lucy's departure. And it did have some really good twists about it, and at the end of the story we meet our new companion, failed actress Tamsin Drew, who incidentally... Christ, is it going to be difficult to talk about this arc without major spoilers? Okay, just spoilers pretty much everywhere from now on. Okay. Yes, Tamsin is an instantly likeable Lucy replacement, but that is a trick for when they pull the rug out from under your feet in a few episodes' time, which I'll talk a bit more about when I get to it. As with all plot twists, it all depends on how it's done and the quality of the writing to dictate whether the surprise works or not. And while you might have been able to see the rug pulling coming and the fact that Tamsin's not exactly going to be here for that long, it is well executed. There was no extensive hat tipping at the listener going, ooh, look at us. We've got something impressive that we're going to pull off in a few episodes' time, which I do really appreciate. The writers successfully managed to keep a lid on it. There was no self-referencing going on, which shouldn't be, but in this current climate is something to be applauded. Take note, writers of the future. If you've got a plot twist that you're proud of, play it cool and it's more effective. Nevermore is Tamsin's first story, and I find it to be a little bit misjudged by people, myself included, from the way it starts. It starts out on the surface by doing a thing which is a particular bugbear of mine in popular media, where it relies very heavily on a classic writer as a cultural reference point in order to hold itself up on an intellectual high horse and deflect criticism because, well, it has to be intelligent, doesn't it? It's sort of loosely based on a classic. Which is usually, not always, a hack technique that's used to make you think that the person writing it is smart and that the work has intellectual weight. Ahem. If you're going to rely on classic lit references, you've got to bring something of your own to the table that justifies the reliance on it. And fortunately, Nevermore does bring something to the table, and even if you're not a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, which I do go for some, he's about as far back as I read, Nevermore at the very least does weave its classic lit references into an interesting alien planet. There's evil robotic ravens that speak in rhyme, because of course there are. I mean, it's Doctor Who does Edgar Allan Poe, why would you not do that? And the planet itself is this sprawling wasteland acting as a prison, which is cloaked in a mist called the Red Death. And the funny thing is that Nevermore kind of plays out as though it's making a point about media that relies on classic lit references in order to gain intellectual credence while doing just that. As the prison planet was designed to be themed around the works of Edgar Allan Poe by a prison warden who's an obsessive fan of his work, and said bizarre design for it is one of the reasons that events spiral out of control. I found Nevermore to be a lot more enjoyable than its reputation indicated, and it's the dark and grotesque kind of story that I felt was necessary to introduce Tamsin to the Doctor's world and set about the changes that would come in a few episodes' time to make her arc more interesting. The Book of Kels is up next, and it sees the Doctor and Tamsin arriving at Kels Abbey in Ireland at a time when it was regularly plundered by Vikings, and there's been disembodied voices, some unexplained disappearances, and some sudden deaths. And the Doctor and Tamsin uncover the mystery of how the Book of Kels was stolen, and then recovered a few months later. The Book of Kels itself isn't exactly a very well-known historical document, so I don't know if I could call this story historically accurate or not. It probably is, but I do really like this idea of writing time travel ideas around famous historical mysteries, and I'm actually surprised that Doctor Who rarely does this. Going back to a historical mystery and conjuring up a Doctor Who explanation for it is the mark of a sci-fi writer having fun with the unexplained, which is something I'd like to see them do in New Who more often. And while I'm here, New Who, could we get another pure historical at some point, please? I really don't know why we've abandoned pure historicals, because I don't think I've heard a bad one from Bigfinish so far. But yeah, Book of Kels is heavily into providing your plot twists, so I won't talk much about the events of it, but what I will talk about is an old face who shows up here, called the Meddling Monk. Peter Butterworth played the Time Lord Delinquent in two of my favourite First Doctor stories, The Time Meddler and The Daleks' Master Plan, just before he was in almost every Carry On movie ever until his death in 1979. And the monk wasn't recast until now, his role essentially having been filled by the Master a few years later. Conventional sci-fi villains have gone through a fair bit of rewriting since Butterworth's day, and if you were going to do the Meddling Monk in 2011, you would ideally need a very specific type of actor to fill this role. Graham Garden. Oh my god, that's just perfect, isn't it? Graham Garden as the Meddling Monk. Like, that's just flawless logic. Unfortunately, Graham Garden sticks around for the rest of the series, because why would you waste such a perfect casting on just one story? Next up we got Demos, and it's the start of a surprise mid-season two-parter. It starts out how you would expect a Bigfinish story about the Ice Warriors to start. It's the future and Mars is now a tourist destination, and someone's curated a museum on one of the moons about the legendary Ice Warriors who've vanished by this point and fallen into myth. And obviously, the Ice Warriors now wake up and want Mars back. It would be basically just standard Bigfinish fare if it played out like that for the rest of it. Demos is about as average as scene setters go, which ain't specifically a bad thing, it's just not really anything you've never heard before. I did enjoy the middle-aged couple on holiday looking around the Ice Warrior Museum when the Doctor and the aforementioned villain show up. That's the sort of thing that you would have seen in Classic Who all the bloody time. But the story's made much more interesting when, massive spoiler warning plastered all over the screen again, really can't help it with this series, but I want to talk about this because it's an interesting development. Okay, so Lucy stumbles back into the story at the end of Demos when the Doctor's halfway through figuring out how to beat the Ice Warriors. Apparently she met up with the monk and has been travelling around with him for a while, and now he's dumped her on one of the moons of Mars, and that's when things get a bit weird. While the Doctor and Lucy try and get the Ice Warriors to retreat and get the tourists out of the museum alive, and pretty much just continue the story that we'd been hearing in a fairly standard fashion, and rekindle their companion-Doctor relationship, Tamsin is taken off by the monk, who shows her what will happen to a planet very far away as fallout from what the Doctor does next to defeat the Ice Warriors. Tamsin is shocked and goes, "Holy shit, this is the man that I'm travelling with? Does he just do things and not give two shits about the consequences?" And so Tamsin goes off with the monk while Lucy goes back with the Doctor. Yeah, Resurrection of Mars really gives its A-game when it comes to mid-season drama. The main reason this worked so well was they'd put so much effort into making Tamsin sympathetic with her failed actress backstory that was woven into the very few stories that she was here for, and you did genuinely believe that, yes, this is our new assistant. It's kind of a similar trick to the ones that New Who pulls when kicking companions out. E.g., Rose and Donna's departures were foreshadowed for ages. That and the episode before Amy and Rory left spent about 60% of the runtime going, "Wow, aren't Amy and Rory amazing?" Which is writer's code for they are about to die/leave. And of course, as we all remember, Clara was killed off and then unkilled off a couple of episodes later. But I felt this trick departure for Lucy and then return and companion swap with the monk provided an interesting setup for both Lucy and Tamsin's final departures at the end of the series. Resurrection of Mars is a really fun story, and it's interesting how they built some weird twists that set the stage for the finale into what on the surface is essentially a bog-standard Doctor Who runaround. Next up is Relative Dimensions, and it sees Susan and her son Alex invited to the TARDIS for Christmas dinner, in which they venture further into the TARDIS and uncover some buried parts of Susan and the Doctor's pasts, and a vision of Alex's potential future. And surprisingly, it's my least favourite of the season, which is odd because it does sound in theory like the kind of wistful tale built for fanboys like me, and there's this amazing sequence where they discovered recycled bedrooms of past companions in the TARDIS's lower levels. There's just some great little bits in this one, the kind of things that you wanted out of Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS, that make you just feel the seemingly never-ending size and scope of the ship. But I'd be lying if I didn't admit that this one is kind of padded. That's the thing with this season's two Susan and Alex stories. One of them really needed more than an hour, and the other one really didn't. Going deeper into the TARDIS is a concept that will get fanboys' eyes twinkling, but it's just turned out to be so difficult to pull off. Maybe it is fanboy expectations getting the better of me again, because it's better than Journey to the Centre. Not saying much, of course, given just how many problems there are with Journey to the Centre. And it does provide a decent little drama breather from the big events of the season, and it's important to the structure of the story arc, and it sets up one thing that does happen in the finale in a what could possibly go wrong, followed by ominous thunderclap kind of way. Although that does kinda heap further attention onto this being one of the slightly less important connecty bits. My feeling this way might be a result of this season having been such a strong one, but it's just a fairly low-key affair in comparison to the previous two-parter, so we kinda got stakes whiplash on it. As said, it's pretty good for what it is. Mark Platt doesn't know how to write badly, and it's a nice little character-focused story, and Carol Ann Ford's always great, but like with An Earthly Child, it is really hard not to expect it to be more than it is. Prisoner of the Sun is next up, and while kind of inconsequential to the framework of Series 4, it's one of the only stories this series with pretty much nothing that it brings to the big climactic ending to the whole thing. But I personally think it'd probably look a lot stronger outside this run of stories, and particularly if it was not directly before that finale. As on its own, it's a pretty decent little subversion of the Doctor Helps the Rebels formula that was the basis for so much of 60s and 70s Who. The Doctor is being kept prisoner along with a robot helper with a program that makes her sound exactly like Lucy on a facility inside of a sun to keep it operational and the atmosphere of the politically destabilised planet below stable. Or is it? And the rebels are trying to break him out and convince him to help them take down the corrupt government. Or are they? Yeah, it's one of those stories, and while it is a tad heavy-handed in parts, Eddie Robson did go in wanting to keep you guessing, and he did manage it. Prisoner of the Sun is full of red herrings, but I didn't mind when I found out that they were red herrings, and I appreciated that it doesn't make it too obvious how everything's going to get tied together in the end. And I felt the conclusion was very rewarding, because I didn't see it coming, and I'd be surprised if the conclusion to this one makes you shout, "Oh, for fuck's sake." It does suffer in parts of trying to be too obtuse for the sake of it, and as said, it is open about it just sort of killing time until the end of the series, but on the whole, outside of the context of this season, I really like this one. And so we enter that finale, Lucy Miller and To the Death, which is a massive leap from the tone that the 8th Doctor audios had taken in previous seasons. It's very continuity heavy, very dark, very bleak, epic, and soul-crushing. Just really, really soul-crushing. It's basically like New Who if it were written by George R.R. Martin. Nick Briggs said in an interview that yes, the Daleks are invading the Earth again, there's not really that much new here, but sometimes you have to use familiar elements to have a tighter character focus, and that's exactly what he did here. Tamsin and the monk are working for the Daleks, while Susan, Lucy and Alex are working with the Earth government to try and find a way to fend off a second Dalek invasion, who've used a combination of unidentifiable alien viruses to kill off most of the population of Earth. Yeah, that really does make for some obviously very uncomfortable listening. It's just so harsh, nasty, violent, and it keeps up that bleak feeling into the second part, and then smashes you in the head with an axe towards the end. The second part, To the Death, is just so heavy, so uncompromising and melancholy. There's a very good reason that this one's talked up as one of Bigfinish's highest points. It's not often on recommended lists because you do need to have gone through at least most of the 8th Doctor series in order to get here. It does require that very, very expensive context, but any like-minded sadists and gluttons for punishment like me out there, this is about as bleak as Bigfinish goes. I would also recommend for this one to listen to the Charlie and 6th Doctor monthly series stories. Long story short, after The Girl Who Never Was, Charlie went off and travelled with the 6th Doctor for a bit. Particularly listen to Patient Zero. It's not utterly essential, but Briggs uses the end of Patient Zero near the end of To the Death, which could be considered a risky decision, but it doesn't really affect the story's gut punches, and there are a fucking lot of them. And I'm going to throw up another spoiler warning because I want to talk about the Daleks' plan in this one. Considering they're 50 years old now, there's always been a sense of, well, what else can we make them do by this point? Because it kind of seems like the possibilities for them have run out after so many decades of Dalek stories. Like, what have they done already? They want to kill another race on their own planet. They invade the Earth. They want to kill the Doctor. They want to kill lots more people. They want to make more of themselves. They want to invade the Earth again. They have a civil war. They want to bring back the Dalek race and invade the Earth again. They want to blow up reality with a really big bomb. In this one though, okay, so the Daleks now have an officer called the Dalek Time Controller, which is a more evolved form of Dalek that can see through time and space in a similar way to the Time Lords, who becomes their strategist and goes on to play a key role in the Dark Eyes box sets. And what he did here was set up the 6th Doctor to be responsible for causing the Earth to become a plague planet. Their plan is to pilot the Earth covered with loads of horrible diseases to contaminate the galaxy to ensure that the universe is completely uninhabitable to anyone but the Daleks and their allies. Stupid, yes, but admit it, you have not heard that one before, have you? But yeah, this finale is totally awesome, although you are most assuredly going to be very poor by the time you get here. And you may want to either wait and see if Bigfinish put the EDAs on offer again anytime soon, or start begging on street corners. I recommend start begging on street corners. You know, because I'm a responsible adult with great life advice.